Good morning, everyone. Quick update. We have our J6 special feature airing tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll show you a trailer for that before we jump over to Epoch TV exclusively, but I want to jump into some other stories first. Briefly, though, we got access to the January 6th unreleased video, 40,000 hours. It's a process of requesting clips, so we're getting clip by clip, but we've compiled a good number of them into what really I think shows a good picture of what happened that day. We'll be airing that one tomorrow, and we might have more coming as well. That said, let's jump into the first story. I'll show you a trailer again after this segment, but let me jump into the first story, which is about how the FBI was actually lying. It turns out Christopher Wray may have actually lied about this. Well, it seems he has. Christopher, head of the FBI, they were targeting Catholics. They were targeting Catholics as domestic terrorists. Now, Christopher Wray previously said that they weren't doing it as the FBI as a whole. It was one small office, one area that was doing it. That had labeled Catholics as domestic terrorists. It was limited. It did not represent all of what they were doing. It turns out that was a lie. The FBI was coordinating across multiple departments to label and target traditional Catholics in America as domestic terrorists. Let me show you what the House Judiciary GOP says. They say this on Twitter first. Subpoenaed documents reveals the FBI Richmond field office coordinated with multiple field offices across the country to produce a memo targeting traditional Catholics as domestic terrorists. Wray, as in FBI Director Christopher Wray, previously said the actions were limited to a single field office. Turns out he lied. The attached document on there, I'll read a bit of what it says. It says the Committee on the Judiciary is continuing to conduct oversight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI's, assessment of traditional Catholics as potential domestic terrorists. From information recently produced to the committee, the House Judiciary Committee, we now know that the FBI relied on information from around the country, including a liaison contact in the FBI's Portland field office, ironically, home to some of the most radical people around, and reporting from the FBI's Los Angeles field office, also a very extreme area, to develop its assessment. Now, why might they label Catholics as potential domestic terrorists or domestic extremists? It's because they were framing Catholics along the same lines of, white supremacists, and they were doing this as well to some Christian groups. If you were a Christian, certain sects of Christianity were also being labeled and investigated as domestic terrorists by other groups. The military, for example, had reports like this. Why is that? It's because the way they're redefining things is this. They're saying basically that anybody who criticizes the policies of the left is a potential extremist. If you disagree with homosexuality, which most religions do, by the way. I can't think of any traditional religion that supports it. Of course, modern interpretations are different. You do find sects these days that follow that. Most of that, by the way, comes around from I'd say the occult subversion of most religions by the antinomialist movement, which I can explain if you all want to hear about it. An anti-moral movement that swept the world, which has actually, in my opinion, subverted most religions by now. And unfortunately, it's a morality of anti-morality is what it represents. A lot of religions don't believe in morality anymore. A lot of them don't. They don't believe that being good or doing good deeds or cultivating virtue, they don't believe it matters. And you find this and there's certain sects in most religions now that have adopted these ideas. It actually comes from an occult movement. The actual term for it was the anti-nominalists. But you do find that has kind of snowballed into a lot of the problems we have these days, where we're facing an anti-moral movement. Morality is no longer defined as, in terms of what's good and what's evil. It's no longer defined as, virtue and traditional morality as being the beacon of what defines goodness. Now what defines goodness is, do as thou wilt. Be free, indulge as you would like. God will forgive you, right? That's the whole idea. Do whatever you want. I do think God will forgive you, but I think you need to make some effort on your part too, personally. But the way that evil is now defined is no longer the violation of religious tenets and the violation of moral standards, but instead if you question the morality of people who indulge. And so evil is no longer if you indulge in sexuality. It's if you criticize people who indulge in sexuality. Evil is no longer if you indulge in, let's say, if you're, in this case, for example, talking about homosexuality. It's if you oppose that. So if you have a moral standard, you're defined as evil by the anti-nominalist system, which has overtaken most modern systems of law and also overtaken a lot of the, I'd say, woke interpretations of modern religions. It's a very big problem. So some of you asking about the anti-nominalism. It was one of the big debates you had around the time of Martin Luther. I believe, if I remember right, Martin Luther actually had a lot of really heated debates with them. And it manifested differently in a lot of different religions. You had similar things happen in Buddhism. You had similar things happen in Judaism. You had similar things happen in Christianity. It was basically an argument of how do you, well, it was different across different religions. So I shouldn't blanket define them. Let me explain first the Martin Luther debate. And so during the time of Martin Luther, when he published his criticisms of the Catholic Church and nailed them to the church doors, he of course set forth an idea that people should be able to self-study religion, that it shouldn't be held by a single power, so on and so on. Part of it was defined as an argument against to what degree should law be interpreted through the state versus through the religion. And this has been a challenge through most of human history. To what degree should religious value influence the nature of law? The real hard thing is that we would like to have societies where you have a clear division between church and state. That's a normal thing. Even going back to the second king of Rome, by the way, the second king after Romulus, for example, they divided church and state. There was a separation of powers between the church and the state. This was not just limited to Christianity or modern religions. It goes to ancient religions as well, where you had a priest sect and you had the ruling class. They were separate, but of course, you always had the influence of morality on the interpretation of law. That's unavoidable as humankind. It's unavoidable. The idea that killing is wrong, the idea that stealing is wrong, the idea that incest is wrong. These are religious concepts. The question we've always dealt with is it's human civilizations is, to what degree do we choose to enforce morality, basically, right? We could even say the difference between modern conservatives and modern liberals is a debate really between strictness and leniency. It's a debate between strictness and leniency. To what degree are we strict? To what degree are we lenient? These debates have never ended. One of the issues you had with the anti-nominalists, though, is that they said that not only should morality not be enforced through legal systems, but it should not be enforced even by religious systems. They believed in an anti-moral system, and so they believed, hey, God, they believed if you repent, for example, with the Christians, if you repent once, you are forever forgiven. And so any future violations of the tenets of Christ are automatically forgiven. And so they believe if you repent, hey, you could be a murderer, you could be a thief, you can keep doing that, and you're forgiven. And so they abandoned the concept that you need to be a moral person in order to go to heaven. Of course, you had other sects that strongly disbelieved that. By the way, that's one of the main interpretations of Gnosticism as well. I'd say you have entire sects that still hold that belief. Within Judaism, you had 1666, what was his name? Sabbatai Zevi, liberation through sin. They believed in practicing the opposite of morality. You violate all the tenets of the religion because they believed if you go to the opposite extreme, it will have the opposite effect and you become a good person somehow. Buddhism really was under the sixth patriarch, I believe Huineng, who kind of changed the ideas of Zen and turned Buddhism into an idea that nothing exists. And it eliminated the idea where, there are 11 different sects of Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is the one that believes like in nothing, basically. It's religious atheism, basically. And that of course came about mainly after the sixth patriarch. And so you had this anti-moral movement that overtook a lot of modern religions. Anti-nominalism, and anti-nominalism has gone on to influence a lot of the modern interpretations of law. I would actually argue that what we're debating right now with, for example, the Biden administration going after traditional Catholics is a manifestation of anti-nominalism. It's actually crazy that this is not more widely discussed. I would argue you cannot understand modern politics without understanding the history of anti-nominalism. So much of the world these days, so many of our debates, even communism and socialism, you cannot understand these without understanding the history of anti-nominalism. Like, so many of our debates are defined by this. People are feeling around in the dark. They don't understand the history of the things we're actually debating. And so the argument from the Biden administration is that really here, if they're investigating Catholics as being domestic extremists, they're arguing that by holding values that reject the modern woke concepts, homosexuality, transsexualism, rampant, crime and so on, loose on crime policies, things that go against traditional religious values. They're arguing that by holding that those things are evil, that Catholics are demonstrating a type of extremism. And this is how they're labeling different religions as being extremist. And of course, there's different interpretations too, to what degree should religions enforce that. A lot of other religions would believe, for example, that morality is your own personal business. Confucianism talks about this, for example, to be lenient on others, but strict with yourself. Although they still had clear definitions and interpretations of law when you infringe upon the well-being of others, which I would argue a lot of the early American law was based on that as well. American law was not the enforcement of religion, but if you infringed upon the rights of others, then that was considered a crime. The history of law is fascinating, by the way. Like, it really, you get into the details of it and how religion influenced it and so on. It's fascinating history. My interpretation of what's happening, though, the Biden administration is defining law in line with the anti-nominalist, by the way, Gnostic occult movement, which has overtaken, unfortunately, a lot of the modern interpretations of religious values. That said, not to get too historical and stuff with y'all, let's move on to some other topics, but we cannot talk about these on YouTube. The 2024 variant of COVID has arrived, right just in time for the elections. The new variant is emerging and, outbreaks are happening everywhere. And they're arguing we might just need new types of lockdowns and so on to protect us all from this new and dangerous variant. Also, Democrats have a new proposal on how to regulate guns, which is tax them so hard that only the wealthy can afford them. Only guns for the wealthy. We'll talk about these briefly, then we'll jump into questions. But first, let's jump over to Epoch TV exclusively, because YouTube will, in fact, give me strikes potentially for talking about guns and talking about COVID. So come over to Epoch TV. We're going to talk about guns and COVID. Let me show you a trailer on another topic they will ban me for, by the way, but I'm going to show it anyway. Let me show you a trailer of my special feature premiering tomorrow. We got the unreleased videos, 40,000 hours we've been going through, although we have many. We have to request segments from them. They won't give us all of them like in our possession. But we can view them, but we can't get possession of all of them. We have to request clip by clip. It's a very difficult process, to be honest. But we've compiled these now into a special feature, first of which will air tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Let me show you a trailer of that and we'll jump over.
What was the process of actually putting this all together?
Many hours of finding the right camera angles and watching it. The first trouble started just after 1 o'clock.
45 pages, here it is right here. Donald Trump has been indicted.
Somber day for the country.
This all happened before President Trump's speech was over.
The founder of the Oath Keepers militia group is headed to prison for more than 18 years.
His lawyers didn't have this video. The video we're watching right now, his own lawyers did not have. There was a big question of what did the people do who actually did enter the building.
This is where we picked it up with the security footage that is new. At this point, the story dramatically changes.
The New Jersey man who assaulted a Capitol police officer on January 6th has been sentenced.
So this was withheld.
This was not shown to the defense.
That could be considered exculpatory evidence. This doesn't seem like what a lot of the media is showing.
It's going to change narratives no matter what your political perspective is. What we're after is the truth.
Again, folks, that premieres tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And my colleague Joe Hanneman, he's our lead reporter on January 6th. He did an incredible amount of work on this. So kudos to him. He's the guy in the video with me. Let me know what y'all think. We'll air it tomorrow morning.